um, I hope you love this story because I really do. It's brilliant. I think it's probably one of the best UFO interactions, abductions, landings ever. I think it's up there. It's absolutely really good. It happened in May 1967 in Madagascar. It had some really good witnesses. The guy was Monsieur Wolf. He was a German chap working, well, he was in Foreign Legion at the time as a soldier, and he was with, there were 23 of them, then an officer and 4 non-commissioned officers with them. So there was like 28 of them altogether. And they left headquarters in Madagascar. Lovely day, beautiful sky, not too blue sky, a bit of clouded that day, they were saying, but it was still beautiful and warm and clear. And they set off, and just before an hour they have to radio back to Central Command just to do like little ops where they're supposed to be every hour, it turns out, like a check. And I don't know if they're still there in Madagascar. I'll say this is 1967. But anyway, as the soldiers are marching through Madagascar, they radio back, telling them where they were, and then they set up a little. Start having dinner basically. Set up a little camp to have the dinner, and it was a large area, big, about 100-foot wide, and a bit of a clearing. Sounds like it's sort of place where they would go normally to once they're out on checks. They do sit there, so it's quite a spot they're used to going. And it's about 100 foot wide. It's a good, nice clearing, and suddenly they're buzzing. Some of them heard buzzing, some of them didn't. And also Monsieur Wolf, who actually reported the story initially, is colourblind. Good hearing, but colourblind. Could see clearly, but his colours different to everybody else's. Anyway, as it came, and they started looking up because I wondered what it was, and they saw it. It was a bright light. All they saw initially was a very bright light, and it was hard to look at because it was so bright. And as more, they all look at it, all 28 of them, and it just came down, and they described it, all of them described it as when a leaf falls, it like that, and it falls and tumbles. And he described it as if it lost control, and it didn't come down in a controlled manner. It's as if it broken down and it fell, that sort of thing. And it went with such a thud. It basically, the ground shuddered. It was only a few yards away, and just they was in the cutting, and just beyond his trees, and they could see it just in the trees. Clearly, it's there, big bright light, and it just boom, and the ground just shuddered. Anyway, they sat there looking at it, and they all got up, and they all basically every single one stared at it, just stared, and then they seemed to be paralysed. Every single one were paralysed, not with fear or dread, or basically physically paralysed. It's as if they seen what was going on and they were still there, but none of them were acting to it. Anyway, once they started to come about, when they started to come about all together, they didn't realise what had happened. Anyway, then they walked up to it, and then they saw it standing on legs, 3 legs, and little triangle feet. So it was giving off like a yellow-white light, but he described it as flames coming out of these little portals, what was spinning around. But he said that more likely it wasn't light, and more like a flash, like you would see on a welding gun. I've heard this before a few times, where it's not actual flame. He says more like a spark, and he says the spark generated quite a distance out. Sometimes 20 feet outwards. So you don't know if it was broken down, but as it went round, and also it intermittent. So this bright spark what came out was quite intermittent, spinning round every 5 seconds, I think he described, and then it changed as it lifted up. But it was still so bright, quite a yellow white colour, and it just stood there with a lot of mist underneath it, because it seemed to lift up. They didn't see it as they were too far away, but as they got closer, they could see the craft just lift up and the legs just lying there under this mist. And they describe it being about 7 to 8 meters high, because it wasn't a dish shape, it was more like an egg, a flat bottom base, but like an egg going up. So it didn't describe the width, just the height. So it's about 7 to 8 meters high, with these what it describes these portholes spinning around around in the middle, giving off that excess spark, which you presume was some sort of propulsion. The mist was under the legs, like a yellow, bright, just so bright, it says it was really hard to look at. Yellow but turning white intermittently. It doesn't know with the spark. Anyway, they all stared at it, and after don't know how at the time, they started walking up to it, and as they got closer sort of to it, the craft lifted up, and the sparks, what was spinning round, went faster and faster, and as it got higher and higher, it went fast. It started to go fast, but boom, it just disappeared. It went just like as if 1 minute it was there, and next bit it was gone. Anyway, they started looking at it and looking round where it's been, and the crater, what it had left, it was 3 meters deep. So when the craft itself, it went with a wallop, and it basically dug itself right in the ground. So literally 9 to 10 feet in the ground. So it came out of the ground and lowered the legs around it, and right in the hole at the bottom, the hole where it landed was all crystallized. That's basically, he couldn't gather the right colour because he's colourblind, but he could tell it was crystallised and shiny like glass. And that was all at the base of this hole. And the hole what it landed in, it wasn't straight, it went that way. So soon when it went down, it blasted out to come out, to make it a bit wide at the bottom to come out. And then it sat on the legs, maybe repairing itself, I don't know. And it sat there for a few minutes, not long, but this is where it gets even more mysterious. Because then, as it is, all 28 of them saw it, clearly saw it, they were just a few yards away now, and they lifted up, I say, clothing, and shot off. And then they looked at each other a few minutes, stunned, looked at the time, and then thought, blimey, it doesn't seem like we've just been stood there, just literally saw it, stood still, it landed and went, but it turns out they've been there 2 and 3/4 hours. So they don't understand how. That's why when the guy describes he was paralysed, they really was paralysed. They were just sat there looking at it, but they lost nearly 3 hours of time, and they didn't radio in for nearly three times. They didn't radio in, so it was all documented. Anyway, went back to base, and that filled forms in, and people from Paris came along, government officials, and told them they can't speak to anybody. They kept them all separate, not allowed to speak to each other, and they all had to sign an oath that they never must speak or write about it. And after they gave them medicals, and all of them, they all had medicals, the officers, everybody. But they didn't actually meet again. They kept them all apart, and he never heard about any of the medical results. He had headaches and felt dizziness, and the temple of his head was hurting for weeks and weeks after. then it just sort of fade over a few weeks, months. And the guy, he lived to a long age. He went and started a hotel business years and years later. So in France, thank goodness. But yeah, totally true. Like I say, 28 witnesses. A few of them came forward after, but he's the one what initially started the reporting it. I say it happened 6-7 May, Madagascar, and I think he reported it maybe 10 years later, a long while after he reported it. He didn't just go straight to the media. And how he reported it, I'm not quite sure, but it got out there. So, and here we are. But it's not very popular, which dumbfounds me. You think, you see film with the kind, this one's even better. You've got 28 servicemen, all logical minded, and all a few yards away, and they've all lost nearly 3 hours of time. Wouldn't it be interesting to know if they all went under hypnosis, treatment, and maybe they did, some of them. But if there is, I haven't got any of those stories of them. But all I can tell you, it clearly happened. But brilliant story. I love it. One of my favourites. A guy called, I say, Monsieur Wolf. If you want to check him up, he's brilliant in Madagascar. I hope you like that. True story. Thank you. Bye.